Connor Williams is officially a Seattle Seahawk, and as a result, there's some musical chairs going on at the center position. I'll be breaking down a mid-August trade here on our bonus Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Sumner, Washington, or over in Akron, Ohio. The show certainly will have some interest for fans in the great state of Ohio. A special thanks to all of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks initiating a mid-August trade. Connor Williams needed a roster spot, and it turns out the perfect fit was moving on from one of the centers already on the roster. Nick Harris didn't really get a chance to get to know you in a Seahawks uniform. Harris signed a contract with the Seahawks for 1 year back in March. He was reunited with Scott Huff, who was his offensive line coach at Washington, where he won all Pac-12 honors 2 different times. Was drafted by the Cleveland Browns, played his first 4 years there, comes to Seattle, and a lot of people thought that he was going to be competing for the starting job against Olu Oluwatimi, and that's really what was happening the last 3 weeks at training camp. And in fact, it seemed like Harris had gained some ground in that race, but the entire time there was the elephant in the room, and that was Connor Williams, who visited with the Seahawks a day before the start of training camp. He remained a discussion point as a potential upgrade at the center position. As it turns out, it is now official. The Seahawks announcing today that Connor Williams has signed his contract, and to open up a roster spot, Nick Harris is heading back to Cleveland. He'll be back with his original team. And looking at the trade details, basically Seattle and Cleveland agreed to a pick swap in 2026. The Seahawks sending Nick Harris, the veteran center who's also played some guard in the NFL, to the Cleveland Browns, along with a 2026 7th-round pick in exchange for a 2026 6th-rounder. So basically, John Schneider decided, well, I need to move on from Nick Harris. In order to do so, I'm going to just swap picks, move up a round in the 2026 draft. And what's interesting about this is that Nick Harris started for the Seahawks last night at center, but he only played 12 snaps. And meanwhile, in the Browns game, they lost their backup center, Luke Whippler, to a fractured ankle. So this seems like one of those weird cases where the Cleveland Browns might have been calling John Schneider early in the game in LA last night after this injury happened, saying, hey, we need a center. We know Nick Harris. He started 4 games for us over the last 4 years, played over 500 snaps. He's played some center. He's played some guard. This presented an opportunity for them to bring back a player they were familiar with, who quite frankly was the odd man out in Seattle. The Seahawks were not ready to give up on Olu Oluwatimi yet in just his second season, one of their former draft picks, former Remington Award winner, but they didn't feel like he was the guy at center this year. The opportunity to get a player in Connor Williams, who is a top 5 center when he's healthy. The fact that the Seahawks moved on from Nick Harris and this opportunity, that suggests to me they believe that Connor Williams is going to have a very good chance to be ready in week 1, that he's going to be able to maybe start doing some stuff this week when they go to Nashville for joint practices against the Titans. But this really did feel like one of those cases where the Cleveland Browns were calling up the Seattle Seahawks in the middle of the game. We just lost our backup center for the season. He's going to need surgery on his ankle. What do we need to do to swing a deal to bring Nick Harris back? And it was an expendable player for the Seahawks, knowing they were going to have to make a move anyway with the roster being full in order to sign Connor Williams this week. So these two moves going together with perfect timing. Seattle's able to get Nick Harris to Cleveland. And some may say, man, he's got to be bummed about the contract that he signed and not even getting a chance to play in any regular season games for the Seahawks. But he's familiar with Cleveland, played there the last 4 years. He's going to be able to jump in and know the offense is the same coaching staff they had last year. So he should be able to hit the ground running going back to Cleveland. And quite frankly, he's going to be the next in line there if there's an injury at the center position. That would not have been the case in Seattle if they wouldn't have been able to trade him. I had been predicting that he wasn't going to make the roster and maybe ends up being one of those veterans that gets re-signed on the practice squad, depending on whether or not there's interest from other teams. outside. So the fact the Seahawks were able to make this trade, sometimes injuries, nobody's wishing for them, but sometimes they end up creating opportunities, and then teams have to try to fill gaps. And that's what the Cleveland Browns did here by acquiring Nick Harris back from the Seahawks, whose Seahawks tenure is going to end without a regular season game and just 12 snaps. But again, this may be the better scenario for him now, where he has a better chance in Cleveland to potentially play down the line, where I don't think he would have made Seattle's roster. I don't think he would have been better at guard than some of the other backup options the Seahawks have on their roster at that position. So I don't know that he would have been able to make this football team anyway. So John Schneider changing a 7th for a 6th round pick, that is a win. And you get this victory of being able to open up a roster spot for Connor Williams, who is going to be your starter at the center position. Let's shift this story now away from the trade and to Connor Williams. Now that we know he is indeed going to be a Seattle Seahawk, I think there were some fans out there that were speculating, well, until the contract's signed and we get an announcement from the team, we're not going to get our hopes up that he's a Seahawk, even though Mike McDonald confirmed on Thursday that he was supposed to come in this weekend. That's exactly what happened. He signed his contract today. So Connor Williams is now officially a Seahawk. We can move on from the speculation. Well, it was just a report. The Seahawks are getting a player who has been one of the premier centers in the league the last 2 years since the Miami Dolphins signed him and moved him there from guard, where he played his first 4 years for the Dallas Cowboys. 1 sack and 6 pressures allowed in 9 games last year. Yes, he had 2 different injuries that cost him time. Durability has been the biggest question mark throughout his NFL career, but he was really dominant in pass protection. He has been a top 3 ranked run blocker among offensive linemen, not just centers, offensive linemen each of the last 2 years. So you are talking about a player who consistently gets after it. And I think the biggest strength for Connor Williams in his game, and I love this fit in Ryan Grubb's offense. You're talking about a guy that is an elite athlete at the position, assuming that he didn't lose any of that juice after the second torn ACL. He's had 2 of them in his NFL career. That's the big worry here. But assuming that he is back being his normal self, moving the way that he's capable of, there is not a center in the NFL right now that is better at climbing to the second level and getting to defenders, getting his hands on them, on run plays, on screens. So if Seattle wants to run screens effectively, Connor Williams is going to be a great guy to have on that offensive line. I don't know there's a center in the league when healthy right now that is as good at that as what Connor Williams is. You can run your zone game. He's got great quickness and movement skills, and there's enough punch for him to be able to knock some guys off the line of scrimmage too. I think he's at his best as a zone gap blocker or zone scheme blocker, but he can block all types of runs. He can get to the second level off double teams, on screens. I think that's a great asset that he's going to bring. If you want to pull him, he is an excellent pulling center, which the Dolphins did some. And Washington last year, they pulled their center a lot in Ryan Grubb's offense. So I think that the fit is picturesque here. Putting Connor Williams with this offense for Ryan Grubb. Geno Smith is going to love him from a pass protection standpoint with the success he's had the last 2 years in Miami, protecting Tua Tagovailoa. So I'm looking at this. This is, I don't think, a hot take, but I'm looking at it this way. This was the move. We've talked about it for the last 4 or 5 years. Why can't the Seahawks make a big-time investment at the center position? My take is that Connor Williams could be the missing piece needed for Seattle to win the NFC West. I'm not sitting here predicting that the Seahawks are going to win the NFC West. I've said this entire offseason that I still think the 49ers are the class of the division. The Rams are going to be tough. I think the Cardinals are going to be much improved. But Seattle's biggest weakness was still the offensive line. And I think when you bring in a player of this caliber, I truly believe Connor Williams is a top 5 center when he's healthy. The health questions are not going to go away. They shouldn't. That is a reasonable worry when we're talking about Connor Williams. But when he is healthy, his pass protection, his run blocking, particularly in the zone game, getting him to the second level, moving him as a pulling guard on traps, he is a top 5 center in the National Football League. That's the kind of player you put him with a group that's going to now have Laken Tomlinson, who I still think has some good football in him. Those veteran presences that you're now going to have in the middle are going to help the youngsters like Charles Cross, Anthony Bradford, who looks like he is going to be your starting right guard, not Christian Haynes to open the season. And you're hoping Abraham Lucas is going to come back. That is the lever here that really is going to dictate what the floor and ceiling is for this offense. But Connor Williams is going to elevate that floor, being a top 5 center that I think has the talent, if everything else falls together, that this offense can take that next step where they are a top 5 caliber scoring offense. And if they do that, they have a chance with how much improved I think this defense is going to be. I don't think it's a top 10 unit, but I think it's going to be a much improved defense. You have a top 5 offense with that. You have the pieces to win the NFC West. So that's my take here. I'm not predicting the Seahawks are going to win the division, but I think they sure as hell improved their chances of winning the NFC West. That's how big of an addition that I think Connor Williams is. And unfortunately for Nick Harris, it made him expendable, but a better situation for him now going back to Cleveland, being the number 2 center for the Browns with Luke Whippler now out for the remainder of the season. Up next, the big reason for this bonus episode, we haven't gotten to a mailbag for a while. I'm going to be tackling as many questions as I can from you, our valued listeners. We'll get to those here in a moment on our Sunday bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy and also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to top performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, even windshield wiper fluid. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the most valuable player and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the bonus Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, and thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Bonus episode during the middle of the season. Usually it is for one thing, and that's tackling questions. Was getting a ton of awesome questions today on social media. Decided to open up the mailbag, and that was going to be the entire show. And then the Seahawks decided to make a trade, sending Nick Harris to the Browns. So let's finally get to those mailbag questions, shall we? And our first one here coming from Brian D4843 on X. Did Sam Howell show enough last night to suggest he could start down the line? So I'm not going to say that I saw enough from Sam Howell last night to think that, oh man, that's your starter in 2025. It's one preseason game going against the Chargers, who are not playing very many starters. There were some missed throws. There were some missed opportunities. It was far from a perfect performance. But I will say this. This is just another positive step forward for Sam Howell here, because I think he's looked a lot better the last week in practice. He's looking more comfortable in this offense. He made a couple really impressive throws, particularly in the second half. That 26-yard strike to Tariq Young when he stared down a blitz, read it, and unloaded the football in stride to Tariq Young. You're seeing some of the arm talent that John Schneider has been loving since he saw Sam Howell play at North Carolina. And maybe the most important part, no interceptions, no turnovers. He nearly had a pick six, but I'm going to defend him on it. It was a bubble screen. The quarterback is asked to get rid of the ball right after they catch it. If a defender gets a beat on it the way that he did there, you know what? That's a play that I'm not going to blame the quarterback. It's very difficult to turn and look like you're going to throw the ball out there and then pump fake it. That is very challenging to do on those plays. I thought he played a pretty clean game. His completion percentage was hurt by the fact that he did make some smart decisions to get rid of the football. His offensive line didn't always protect him very well. But again, that Tariq Young throw, he stepped up in the pocket and showed his movement skills. So I think you are seeing some baby steps here by day. Sam Howell is getting better by day, and the physical tools are there for him. So I'm not going to say that I didn't see some things like last night in his game that I could say, you know, that looked like a play a starting quarterback could make. There have been flashes. There just hasn't been enough consistency to this point. But that's why these preseason games are so crucial, because the Seahawks are hoping Geno Smith is going to play every snap this year. If you're truly going to evaluate Sam Howell right now, it has to be in these preseason games going against NFL talent. You got to see what he's made of carrying this offense, running this offense. And I thought last night was, again, another very nice step forward for him in his Seahawks debut, at least from a game perspective. Next question here from Alex H81015. What is the percent chance 2 or more Seahawks offensive linemen are Pro Bowlers this upcoming season? I was spacing out here when I put together this graphic and I put Michael Dixon up there for some reason, but maybe Michael Dixon could be an offensive lineman. He is a wizard, but 2 offensive linemen making the Pro Bowl for the Seahawks, I'm going to go less than 5%. And that doesn't mean that the line is not going to be improved, but I still think you're talking 5 offensive line positions. I could see it being very challenging. Could I see 1? I think there's a 50% chance that you'll get 1. Charles Cross looks like he's ready to take a big step forward. You now have Connor Williams, who deserves to be a Pro Bowler at some point. He has played at that level the last couple of years. So Seattle's got some pieces to be able to get a Pro Bowl offensive lineman. I think 2, though, might be asking a little bit much. So I'm going to go under 5% on that one. Question number 3 coming from Axel MTG. Thoughts on Jamie Sheriff? He looked like a beast, and I didn't even know he was on the team. This is one of the things that fans embrace about the preseason. And even as a beat reporter, I enjoy seeing the underdogs come out and get a chance to show what they can do. We always know about the Troy Maine Popes of the world, and there's been plenty of other examples for the Seahawks the last 10 to 15 years of players who came out and had fantastic preseasons that ultimately didn't do much or anything in the regular season. Cason Williams is another one that comes to mind that fans were irate about not making the team and then didn't do much the rest of his NFL career, but he had a really good preseason for the Seahawks several years back. So there have been examples of preseason standouts like that. Jamie Sheriff, to me, is another player that fits in that category. Watching the film, replaying it, he was active. You got to see him moving around. A guy that just signed this past week. Those kind of players are usually just brought in because teams are looking for guys to fill snap quotas in these preseason games because they're not playing their starters and they're limiting how much their second string guys are playing. But players that take advantage of those opportunities can still earn themselves practice squad spots. They can catch the attention of other teams. So when you're an undrafted rookie like Jamie Sheriff here, any good film that you can put out there, it's going to increase your odds. The Seahawks say, you know what? We saw enough flash from you. Let's bring you back as a practice squad guy, or another team may be willing to do that if they got a good look at you. So we've seen that happen time and time again in the NFL, even with the expanded practice squads, that can happen for players. So still an absolute long shot to make the football team. But these are always great stories when you see guys come in the middle of camp that have a couple practices to try to learn a scheme. And, hey, you get to play 75% of the snaps tonight for us, and they take advantage of it and play well. That is always a good story for a player like Jamie Sheriff. Question from Kev and T. Thoughts on the room at the running back room right now for the Seahawks? I absolutely love this running back room because when camp was opening, Kenny McIntosh was considered the favorite to win that third down job. I think at this point, George Halani, and I know my colleague yesterday, Connor Benintendi, may not agree with me on this, but I think that George Halani has got the advantage in that competition right now. He has been the better overall player. The pass protection yesterday is what hurt Kenny McIntosh. I loved how he ran the football, the competitive spirit running the ball, grinding through tacklers, getting extra yardage. I like his hands of the backfield. I think he could have some value as a kick returner if needed there. But the pass protection issues, he got blown up a couple times yesterday. George Halani's been really good in that regard in camp practices and now in games. He also had a special teams tackle yesterday, a really nice tackle in coverage on a kick. So we have seen George Halani show that versatile skill set off. But that tells you the depth the Seahawks have at this position, because I think all 4 of those players have a really good chance to make the team when you're talking Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet, George Halani, and Kenny McIntosh. Because of the special teams value, the third down value, those 4 players could all very well be on this roster. In fact, I think right now I would be heading in that direction to get those 4 players on the roster. So I think this is an outstanding running back room. I do think there's a big gap between the first 2 players. There should be. They were second-round picks, and Kenny McIntosh, a 7th-rounder, and George Halani, an undrafted player. But I think they all 4 are NFL caliber, regular season NFL caliber running backs, and the Seahawks could hang on to all of them. So this is one of the strong position groups, no question about it, for the Seahawks on this 2024 roster. Picking up our next question here, Ryan B. Katz. Do you think Boye Mafe playing so many snaps, I saw him out there in the third quarter, is a sign he may not be as high on the depth chart as we thought? You know, I can understand the concern on that front, but I'm going to say no, and there's one big reason why. Look at who didn't play in the game last night. Draymond Jones is going to be playing off the edge. They're hoping he's practicing this week. He was finally back in that non-contact walkthrough practice on Thursday. They're hoping Draymond Jones is back. Darrell Taylor's been out injured. The undrafted players like Nelson Caesar, there just haven't been enough flashes from those guys to really cut into the reps. I mean, Derek Hall was playing into the second half, and so was Boye Mafe, and I think some of it was out of necessity because Uchenna Nwosu wasn't going to get very many snaps, if any. So the position is just kind of barren in terms of depth right now with some of the injuries they're dealing with. And Mafe is still a year 3 player trying to learn this new scheme. So why not give him and Derek Hall reps? So I don't consider in this instance, I think all of these have to be looked at on an individual basis. I don't think this is concerning at all. He is going to play a lot of snaps for the Seahawks, even if Draymond Jones ends up being the one that's a starter, as shown on the unofficial depth chart. Question coming in from M. Jorgenson 22. What is your sense regarding our linebacker depth? Who would start and what happens if a starter gets injured? So as far as starters go, it is our 2 main veterans here. I still think Jerome Baker is going to be ready for week 1. I know he's dealing with a hamstring injury, but I think they'll have him back. Tyrell Dodson's been active all of training camp, and I've been impressed from what I've seen from him. Those 2 players are going to be the starters in week 1. But I would keep a very close eye on. I've been saying this for a couple months, and I feel even more confident in saying this now. Tyrese Knight is going to be a player to watch out for as this year goes on, especially if he continues to grow. I thought he made some really nice plays in yesterday's game. He had a beautiful tackle that he made on a 3rd down screen play to force a punt for the Chargers. I just think this kid has too much natural ability for him not to make a push at some point to get some snaps on defense. And oh, by the way, John Radigan, he got my defensive game ball yesterday. John Radigan's a player that might be a better fit for this defense than Pete Carroll's because he is more of that downhill thumper at that middle linebacker spot. We saw him blitz and get a sack. He should have had 2 yesterday. So I can see there still being some concerns. That might be a position that they're looking in the waiver wire, seeing if they can add somebody else. But Patrick O'Connell has shown some promise this training camp. He's been hitting people. So Mike McDonald might be higher in this position group, and I'm starting to be higher in this position group than what I was. But you got to get Jerome Baker back healthy. To me, that's the real X factor here looking towards the season. Hope you can keep him on the field because I think Jerome Baker's a pretty darn good football player. Durability has been the big question mark for him. Question here from Jim Osmer. Which day 3 pick are you most excited about? So I just talked about who I believe that is. It's Tyrese Knight. And at least in terms of a guy that's going to be playing right away, potentially, Tyrese Knight has got the insane ability to just find the football. The guy he has a nose for the football wherever it's at on the field. We've seen some flashes in coverage from him in training camp. He can blitz. He can get after the quarterback. And he's just a really athletic dude in the middle that can play both linebacker spots. They've been using him at weak side linebacker, but Tyrese Knight is the day 3 guy right now that I would say I'm most excited about. If we're going to look from a long-term lens, this might surprise some people, but Mike Jarrell is the name that is my wild card here because Mike Jarrell has shown some flashes in the training camp practices, in the one-on-one drills, had some nice blocks last night. He had some missed opportunities too, but he's a Division II player going to the NFL. It was his first game against other competition. Mike Jarrell is a 95% plus, 95 percentile athlete at the tackle position. There's very few players that have that kind of athleticism. So that is a guy that I would keep a very close eye on. As far as beyond this year, I don't know if he is going to make the roster this time around. They might be hoping they can sneak into the practice squad, but that would be a player in day 3 that I think there's some really high potential there if you were able to develop and he really takes the coaching from Scott Huff. And our last question here, a really good one to finish off with from T. Pedro 22. If you could pick one player to surprisingly make the 53, who is it? So going into last night, I didn't consider Brady Russell to be a surprise anymore because I've seen Brady Russell make a lot of plays in training camp practices. He's a really good special teams player. Then he goes out and scores a touchdown last night. I feel like he sealed the position. If we are looking for true surprises to make this football team, I'm going to look none other than cornerback D. Williams, and I'm going to list as a defensive player, even though he started at receiver at the beginning of camp, had a pass breakup last night. He did give up a big play. He has been hit and miss on defense, but I just think the kick and punt return potential, we didn't get to see him do that last night, but this is a really good football player that I think can get after it and can provide the Seahawks with some spark on special teams that might have enough upside that's worth keeping around on the roster if he is one of your two best returners. So D. Williams is a name that I would keep an eye on defense. And on the offensive side of the football, I'll mention the name Cody White. I right now would not have Cody White making this team, but he does so many things in the practice field well. He's a big-bodied receiver that has really soft hands. He's reliable as a route runner. He can contribute for you on special teams. He had one of the key blocks that sprung Laviska Shenault in his 44-yard kick return yesterday. The new special teams rules, there's going to be some different personnel that's going to be used blocking on some of those plays. Cody White might be somebody to keep an eye on. I think the top 6 receivers are already set, but Seattle could keep 7 receivers if they truly believe Cody White is one of their better special teams options and they want to have another bigger-bodied receiver that is available to potentially play. So I'm looking at him as a practice squad guy, but Cody White would be the one sleeper for me to watch that's kind of risen up my rankings here over the course of training camp. And then I would have D. Williams, the undrafted rookie out of Tennessee, with his kick and punt return capabilities. And the fact that he has made some plays at corner and looks much more comfortable there than the receiver position. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We'll be back coming up tomorrow, going to be diving into our 53-man roster projections, the latest ones coming from Rob Rang and myself. Make sure that you are listening in and enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Go Hawks.